Hello, Faith here from the OWASP DevSlop Show, where we meet industry practitioners who join us to teach us something new. If you are new here, please make sure to subscribe to our channel and enable the notifications so that you can get more shows. Know that all the important information that we'll discuss today will be added to the description box. Nikki?
Hey everyone, welcome. Thanks, Faith. Our guests today are Negar and Noushin Shabab. Negar is a security researcher for Microsoft. She has worked in different offensive and defensive roles in cybersecurity over the past 8 years, from malware analysis and security software development to application security consulting and penetration testing. Noushin is a senior security researcher at Kaspersky's GREAT, which stands for Global Research and Analysis Team, specializing in threat intelligence, reverse engineering, and analysis of targeted attacks. So we're really excited to have them today to talk about compromised compilers. But before that, Faith and Jax, I'd like you guys to tell everyone who you are.
Hey. Once again, my name is Faith Appeal. I am a threat hunter at IBM. That simply means that I proactively look for persistent threats within an environment. I have been in IT for around 10 years, but specifically in security for the past 5. I'm really excited to be here and learn more from our presenters today.
Cool.
Hi, I'm Jax. I've been in security for about 4 years. Currently, I'm in development. I focus mostly on forensics.
All right, cool guys. So welcome, Negar and Noushin.
Hello.
Good to have you.
Thank you. Good
All right. So, what do you guys have prepared for us today? What are we going to talk about?
Okay. So, first of all, thanks for the introduction. But just to let everyone know, I'm Noushin. I'm Negar. We specifically wore different colors, so you won't get confused.
Cool.
Okay, so we are going to talk about compromised compilers today, and we are going to look at some software supply chain attacks and how they actually happened through compromising software development environments and targeting like software developers at first place. Okay, so to start, as you see the topic, compromised compilers, a new perspective of supply chain attacks. This presentation is about the attacks that target software developer systems, compilers, linkers, and IDEs. In these attacks, the attackers use compromised development tools to inject malicious code into application programs. The end victims, of course, are the application users. From an attacker's perspective, it can be much more effective, and it often helps to remain undetected longer if they plant their poisonous seed in a safe place and then watch it grow into a huge poisonous tree rather than poisoning victims one at a time. In this talk, we will see how the attackers take advantage of our trust in the software supply chain and what looks familiar to us to stay below the radar. This is our agenda for today. We are going to talk about some, we want to first get some understanding of how does one trust a piece of software, and then we want to talk about the concerns around malicious compilers and when people started getting concerned about this type of attacks. And after that, we are going to talk about like actual examples of using infected compilers and compromised compilers in the attacks. So let's talk about trusting a piece of software. Let's start our talk with a few questions. Do you trust every application to be safe from malicious behavior? Of course not. We all know that there are many malicious programs out there. Okay, but then what is your approach towards trusting the application to use? So you may say buy or download from trusted sources, but we may know these sources, but do we really know what is that they are offering? To be more precise, should we blindly trust whatever a known source offers? Sure, let's ask for the source code. That way we can know exactly what is in the source code of the application. What if the application is different and not compiled from the source code that we inspected? This is quite easy. We can compile the application from the source code ourselves, and problem should be solved, right? But what is the compiler itself? How can we ensure that the compiler didn't add anything to our program? Maybe we can compile the compiler source code ourselves, just like what we want to do with the application source code. But what about the compiler we use to compile our compiler? Let's stop in this level. This is not a new concern. Let's go back in time. Let's look at some history. 1983 ACM Turing Award. For those of you who might not be familiar with Turing Award, it's recognized as the Nobel Prize of Computing, an annual prize given by Association of Computing Machinery to an individual or individuals selected for contributions of lasting and major technical importance to the computer field. In 1983, these two guys that we all know, Dennis Ritchie and Ken Thompson, received this award for their development of generic operating systems theory, and specifically for the implementation of the Unix operating system. But what is in our particular interest here is in Ken Thompson's Turing Award lecture titled Reflections on Trusting Trust. To what extent should one trust a statement that a program is free of Trojan horses? Perhaps it is more important to trust the people who wrote the software, Ken Thompson said. Ken noted that trust is relative and one should trust the software only when they inspect the development process from the beginning to the end. The problem here is that people only inspect the source code and not the compiled machine code after the source code went through the compilation process. He described how he injected a malware into a compiler. Not only did his compiler know when it was compiling a specific program to inject a backdoor in it, but it also knew when it was compiling itself and injected the backdoor generator into the compiler it was creating. This way, the malicious behavior of the compiler was persistent even after recompiling the compiler from its clean source code. Now let's go back even further. The US Air Force in 1974. Back then, they were using the Multics operating system inside the US Air Force. And to ensure that things were really safe, they would bring in the source code of the OS in-house and compile it themselves. In June 1974, US Air Force conducted a comprehensive security evaluation on Multics. Most of the Ring 0 modules of Multics were written in PL1 programming language, and the analysis report indicates an attack using PL1 compiler and calls it a compiler trapdoor. The concern was that a malicious compiler can insert an object code trapdoor into a Ring 0 module. Enough for the security concerns from the past. Let's look at any actual attacks using infected compilers.
Negar and Noushin, might ask the question, what is the title of that paper that you were referring to?
The title of the Ken Thompson's paper is Reflections on Trusting Trust.
Thank you.
Or did you talk about this Air Force report?
Yes, I believe it's the Air Force one.
Oh, the
I
Air
have
Force
the link.
one.
I'll drop it in the chat. I just Googled it.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, it's called multi-security evaluation. It's actually a long report, 40 pages. But yeah, we only picked the part that was relevant to our topic. Okay, so let's look at some examples of such attacks. Induc. Induc virus is believed to be the first of its kind. Despite other file infectors of its time, the first version of this virus was not interested in infecting executable files on the victim's machine. Rather, it would target the Delphi IDE on the victim's machine if it could find any. And it would insert its own code into the IDE modules, which would eventually infect all the programs compiled using that environment. However, the latest version of this malware, found in 2011, was also interested in infecting executable files on the victim's machine. Let's look at different variants of this malware. Induc A was interested in Delphi IDE, and Induc B, excuse me, which came in 2011, was interested in Borland Developer Studio and CodeGear BDS. And also, there were added some anti-debugging techniques and XOR encryption to do some obfuscation on the code. These two versions were looking for the Delphi IDE, and they would target the sysconst.pass module of this IDE, and there were no malicious payload. But the latest version, Induc C, it would target different module of the IDE, and it creates a backdoor through through which other malware can be downloaded and run on the system. And it was also infecting the executable files, even on the USB sticks, to just help the spreading.
So just a question. So to the mechanics of this, it was like the target was the Delphi IDE, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And then, so then within the IDE, if you were compiling something, that's when the exploitation process would, or the exploitation of the compiled, of the thing you were compiling would happen?
That's true. We are going to see shortly how
Cool.
the whole compiler module, like the infected compiler module, works.
Cool.
But first, let me give you some examples of Induc negative impacts, even with the first versions, which they didn't infect executable files. So some common softwares which was infected with Induc was, for example, INT media player and keep instant messaging. And a lot of infected programs like this instant keep had an integrity check on a startup using a checksum. So this infection could sometimes have negative results and stop the program from running correctly. And also, one malware was downloaded by the latest version of Induc, was a password stealer, which could be used to gain access to private FTP servers, and it was capable of extracting passwords from various FTP applications. So let's look at what happened on the developer system. I think it might answer your question as well. So once it's on the victim's machine, it checks to see if Delphi is installed. It copies the .pass file it's going to use. In this case, it is sysconst.pass. It copies it to it copies it to source, it copies the file, and then it adds this code into the file. It makes a backup of this file and calls it sysconst.back and compiles the infected .pass file, which results in a new sysconst.dcu containing malicious code. The infected .pass file then gets deleted. Once the virus has successfully injected its code into sysconst.dcu, any Delphi program compiled on the machine will be infected. There's no other payload apart from the fact that Induc can spread itself. The interesting thing is the way in which it spreads. It doesn't infect any executable files, as I mentioned, but program language compilation files. Does that answer your question?
And just
Yeah.
another question. Okay, we've covered how the attack happened once the files were actually on the victim machine, but how did it get there? Do we know the point of infection? How
No.
do we know? Okay.
Yeah, sometimes it's really hard to figure out how it happened.
Okay.
So it could have been like some sort of watering hole type attack, or like who even knows, like download a Delphi IDE plugin and then that's how developers are installing it. Or I mean, I guess it's like hard to say.
Yeah, it's definitely more difficult to say because in this specific case, it was actually spreading itself through like other Delphi development environment. So it would actually make it more difficult. You had to trace it back and go find like the patient zero because at every it would arrive in a new system, and if there is a Delphi ID, it would spread itself through new compiled applications, and then that new compiled applications would end up on new systems, and it goes on without actually doing anything harmful. That's what makes it even more like difficult to find because there is no malicious code. It might get out of hand how it went through like all these systems and end up at this specific system. So yeah, with this one, we actually couldn't figure out. It was not us that found this specific attack, but we could not actually find out how it started at first place.
Okay. Thank you.
No worries. Okay, next example. Next example is XcodeGhost. Xcode is the IDE for macOS released by Apple. It is the most mainstream development tool for developing OS X and iOS applications. In September 2015, a malicious version of this compiler caught a lot of attention and became very hot news. Attackers had tampered with XcodeGhost and added malicious modules to it. They also used various propagation techniques to eventually make it super widespread. Palo Alto Networks published a comprehensive report on XcodeGhost. They believe that because network speeds were slower in China, developers in the country looked for local copies of the Apple Xcode development environment and encountered altered versions that had been posted on domestic websites. This opened the door for the malware to be inserted into high-profile apps used on iOS devices. As you can see on the left, a number of different malicious versions of Xcode were available on Baidu. According to the XcodeGhost source code, different system information was stolen by XcodeGhost from victims. But how the malicious compiler works this time? XcodeGhost adds some extra code to the module you see in the slide, ld.xcs spec, which is Xcode module used by its linker. It also adds malicious core services object to default path in Xcode directory. Malicious core services is macro object, which compromises the UI window class and UI device class in the compiled iOS applications. Through the extra code in that module, linker gets forced to load the malicious core services and adds it to every compiled iOS application. Okay, next example, ShadowPad. ShadowPad was actually a supply chain attack, which was first discovered by Kaspersky in 2017. The actor behind this attack is still very active. It's actually identified by Microsoft as Barium. The Operation ShadowHammer and other attacks, which I will talk about later after this example, are also related to this attack. But these days, ShadowPad is not referred to that initial attack anymore. It's more referred to the malware itself, which is now used by different threat actors, like how different threat actors, mostly like Chinese-speaking threat actors, like how it usually works with Chinese-speaking actors. They have lots of code sharing and tool sharing. But this first example, it happened in July 2017. Suspicious DNS requests were found in one of our partners' networks. And this particular partner was a financial institution, and the suspicious requests were originating from systems involved in the processing of financial transactions. So it was very sensitive. Further investigations showed that the source of the suspicious DNS queries was a software package produced by NetSarang Computer Inc. NetSarang Computer Inc. Develops secure connectivity solutions and server management tools for large corporation networks. So we started digging further, and we realized that the recent version of the software produced and distributed by the company itself, NetSarang, had been modified to include an encrypted payload that could be remotely activated by an attacker. The backdoor was embedded into a library from the software package of NetSarang, which was called nsoc2.dll, what you see in this slide. But what actually happened on the developer systems? So the attackers used a malicious program which resembles mscory.dll. This only masquerades the file name and the export function names, although the code has nothing to do with the legitimate library. mscory.dll is a legitimate library from Microsoft and is part of the .NET framework. It actually helps hosting the common language runtime. As you can see here, the function names that the attackers used are mostly from deprecated functions. I guess possibly to avoid interfering with the normal use of mscory.dll by system applications. But the more interesting part for us is the use of a Trojanized link.exe to manipulate the linking process of the compiled applications on the victim's machine. Link.exe is the linker module of Microsoft Visual Studio, and in this particular attack, the attackers had replaced the legitimate link.exe with their own Trojanized one. The Trojanized link.exe decrypts and loads a malicious payload at runtime, and then this malicious payload eventually injects the main payload into the applications being compiled on the victim's machine. So to give you a better picture, the main payload was implanted on the developer system in systems in the form of a separate C++ file. With the help of the Trojanized linker, this malicious module gets linked with the legitimate source code and results in the Trojanized program, the Trojanized nsoc2.dll that we saw earlier. So this is how it worked in this example.
So for this particular example, the build release was actually compromised, right?
It was compromised actually on the developer system. It was a targeted attack as compared to the previous ones that Negar explained. This one, the software developers were actually being targeted, and the actual build software was compromised and being trojanized.
And are there any integrity checks along the way, generally in IDEs, to validate the linkers and all the typical executables that are involved in the compilation of a Windows executable?
Yeah. To be honest, I guess it's not that common. Yeah. Because we saw this kind of attacks as you saw in like different IDEs, different compilers from Windows to Mac to other platforms. So yeah, I guess that's one of the big issues.
Wow.
Yeah. So next one, CCleaner Incident. Later in 2017, ASUS disclosed that CCleaner, which was developed by Preform, a company acquired by ASUS in 2017, was being attacked by cyber criminals. CCleaner is a computer utility program used to clean potentially unwanted files and invalid Windows registry entries for a computer. The attackers had injected malicious code into the CCleaner installer program, and it was distributed to many customers. Follow-up announcements by ASUS researchers noted that ShadowPad plugins were found on some of the systems of CCleaner developers. As shown in this screenshot from ASUS blog, the threat actor had again used this mscore.e.dll. So let's have a look at ShadowHammer attacks now. So first of all, we believe that the actor behind ShadowPad and CCleaner is also behind these operations as well. ShadowHammer was an attack that Kaspersky found and announced in 2019. One of the main targets at this time was ASUS, which was actually one of the primary targets of CCleaner attack. ASUS published a list of targets of the CCleaner attack when they were investigating the attack, and ASUS was one of the targets. So it's possible that the attackers initially got a foothold on the ASUS network through the CCleaner attack. And this was how they got into ASUS. But soon after we found the case with ASUS, we discovered a number of other supply chain attacks, mostly on gaming industry, which were all pointing to the same actor as well. So it was a very busy for this threat actor the year 2019. But what happened on the developer systems this time, the attackers actually used a compromised link.exe as well. But in this case, the link.exe was very similar to the legitimate one. The two files were even signed with the digital signature with the same timestamp, and as you can see in this picture. But of course, the digital signature was not valid in the compromised file. So the two files were almost identical, the same version info, the same size. The P sections almost matched byte by byte. And nothing was touched except for a few bytes which existed in the section responsible for import address table. The compromised link.exe had only one extra import API from an unknown DLL. And the interesting thing was that this API was not even used in the code. So the code was exactly the same as the legitimate file. The malicious DLL that was used in the import address table of link.exe had only one export function, the one that was used in the link.exe. As you can see in this in the screenshot here, the export function was empty and had no functionalities. So no wonder there was no reference to this in the code of link.exe. However, the main malicious logic was inside the DLL main routine of this DLL. But how does this work? How the malicious code inside the DLL main gets executed if there is no reference in link.exe? So, well, this is how the Windows loader works. Upon loading the link.exe file, the Windows loader goes through the import address table and loads all the required DLL files one by one to eventually resolve the addresses of the corresponding API functions so the program can use them later. And this is where the DLL main function of this malicious library gets executed. The malicious DLL was only interested in one particular application on the developer's machine. And the DLL looks out for the time when this target application is being compiled, and as the target application goes through the linker and is being linked with msvcrt.lib, which is a legitimate library, the malicious DLL changes the path to this legitimate library and makes the linker link the target program with a malicious library instead of linking it with msvcrt.lib. So this diagram shows how these malicious modules work all together and Trojanize the target application. The clean source code of the application is linked with the malicious library instead of legitimate library with the help of the malicious DLL, which gets loaded by Windows Loader inside the memory space of the compromised link.exe process. Is it clear how it works?
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I guess this was the last example that we wanted to share.
There is a comment in the chat that I'll just try to drop in here. The recent TNT Trojan steals developer AWS creds. Have you seen compiler compromises attempting to steal developer credentials, or are they mostly infecting the supply chain?
Actually, we talked about an example that one of the malwares that were being downloaded and like spread through one of these compromised compilers was a password stealer. Of course, we don't know the intent of the attackers if they wanted to steal like credentials from developers or from end users, but it's a possibility. But I can't say with certainty that we had seen something like that, but it is very possible.
Thanks.
Okay, so how we wanted to conclude the presentation, supply chain has been in particular interest of sophisticated threat actors in the past like few years at least. And majority of security solutions can easily be fooled when the malicious code is injected into a legitimate software, especially if it has a valid digital signature, like what happened with the ASUS case. Statistics prove that the attackers had benefited a lot from customers' trust in software supply chain. And it all shows how important it is to ensure that the entire development environment is clean and free of any malware or suspicious activity.
Do you have any comments on, like, I know a lot of IDEs have plugins, right? VS Code, there's plugins everywhere, right? There's plugins for a lot of IDEs. That makes sense. Do you feel that creates a vulnerability in that supply chain that leads into the IDE that could create an environment that facilitates attacks like this? Or what are your thoughts on those types of plugins?
Yeah, I think, of course, it's very. I mean, it increases the attack surface definitely because there might be a malicious plugin that is getting like popular and people start using it because people don't like even very experienced developers. Some of them they don't even know what the development process, like the compilation process is and how it works and what are the steps involved in this. So they won't notice if something like suspicious is happening, something new is going on in their development environment. But I guess the more important thing is to make sure that you understand what you are using. You actually need this and you know how it works before you just like install every plugin, every extension, everything that you think might come handy or be useful one day.
Yeah, no, it makes sense. It's just some of these, like if you look at something like Homebrew, like if you're a Mac user, right? There's like third-party, brew taps is what they call them that you can install, and that feeds in a whole nother environment of third-party plugins. It just becomes explosive in terms of managing that kind of environment. But you're right. If you know what you're installing, it's up to you to try to make sure that you're installing the thing that you need. Yeah, it's a tough problem.
Yeah, like malware writers and attackers are getting more and more advanced. It's not. It doesn't make sense to only rely on your security software or on just whatever source that you think is trusted. It makes more sense, especially for people like software developers or actual or computer say computer science specialists. It makes sense if they actually understand what they are using and what they are doing on their system, and not just use their computers like a common user.
Yeah. I think we have a few more questions in the chat.
Sure.
Jax, are you going to take the...
Yeah.
Oh, we have one. Any compiler compromises involving legitimately signed malicious EXEs? Are there? Sorry.
Can you read it again? Actually, I don't know. Well, I can't see the question. Can you read the question again?
Are any compiler compromises involving legitimately signed malicious EXEs? Are there any?
Actually, the one that I talked about in the gaming industry attacks, the link.exe was signed, but of course, because it was tampered, and the attackers added some values, the digital signature was not valid anymore. But the interesting thing about that one was that the attackers were really careful not to change lots of stuff. They actually added only, like, as I said, just the name of the DLL and name of an API function. And they even added this to a part that was like some empty space in the import address table section. They didn't even increase like the size of the import table or size of any section. They only added like 2 strings, and the digital signature was there, but it was not valid anymore.
So it never got checked, the digital signature, even though it was there, or it's just what happened there? Because it would have failed to check, right?
Yeah, but yeah, to be honest, I don't know how it happened. It was only, as I said, it was a targeted attack. It only happened on one specific developer system, or maybe like a few specific developer systems. And the attackers were really advanced. They actually knew what application, they actually used the exact name of the project that was being developed on that system inside their malware. So they actually compiled the malware specifically for that target program, to get that target program compromised and trojanized. So they actually knew, I'm sure they were inside that network for a long time, and they knew exactly what the like developers work routine was, how the developers would check their systems, or if they even had a security software, or their system was like their development environment was updated or not. So yeah, it was an interesting case.
And
Yeah.
why do you think that the attackers now go for the supply chains?
Uh,
Why is it that they're attacking the supply chain? Is there a reason
yeah,
for
I
that?
guess so. Yeah, basically with the last ones that I talked about, that we call them ShadowHammer attacks. Um, it was the ASUS case and the case on like three different gaming industry vendors. At the end, the total number of users that were attacked in that gaming software attacks, it was um, somehow, if I'm not mistaken, if I remember it correctly, around like 90,000 systems. Um, so it makes more sense if you um, if as an attacker you invest your time in compromising one system when you know that it would end up on 90,000 systems, rather than going like after one victim at a time. And also, I guess it helps them to undetected longer. Yeah.
Okay, and we've talked about the problem, right? That we do have the supply chain attacks, but how can we prevent them as developers or as defenders of the network? Is there any way that we can prevent compromised attacks on compilers?
So I guess some suggestions that we can have for developers. First of all, know exactly how your development environment works, and scan your development environment like regularly to make sure that nothing is added to your system. And like what we do as like reverse engineers, when we look at a compiled malware, you can actually look at your compiled code in a debugger, in a disassembler, to make sure that nothing has been changed after you're done with your source code, and you let the source code goes through the development environment, like the compilation process, I mean. And after it's been compiled, try to inspect it yourself and make sure that um, what you're offering to the customers, or to, I don't know, next step of the environment, like the supply chain, is what you actually wanted to offer, and it has not been changed while being compiled. And for the end users, of course, ask for the source code if it's possible. If even if you are a customer of a paid software, you are paying for a service, you can, um, I guess you have this right to ask for like source code to inspect. And make sure that you have some reverse engineering skills you can use to check the software, the compiled program. Ask for like integrity check, maybe for hashes, or I don't know. Make sure that you have a way to um, check the integrity of the program that you want to use.
Okay, and in the case of the CCleaner incident, um, it, what was actually compromised was the Piriform platform, right? So, are there any recommendations to companies or to to organizations that are, you know, including third-party suppliers or third-party organizations into their own process?
Yeah, actually, in that case, yeah, I guess I don't know. Maybe do a thorough audit and like analysis on the new platforms that you want to integrate with your software development environment. I guess that's the best thing. And of course, with like regular checks and regular like investigations, you may find something that if you don't do that, you may just miss it. Again, in one of the examples, the example that I explained about the first ShadowPad attack, with the financial institution, one of our partners, they were actually doing um, one of the regular investigations when they realized that there was some very suspicious like network traffic coming out from one of their systems, and they only realized this because they were doing an investigation. They were doing like a regular check on their systems. And in general, I can say if you are a company that's using third-party applications or third-party libraries in your code, it's always necessary to check the source. If if you have the opportunity to check the source code, just check it. Otherwise, there are some tools um, that can help you checking at least if your third-party applications or third-party libraries are up to date and they are free of any malicious behaviors. For example, if you are using an automated build environment like Jenkins, there are some tools that you can integrate with your environment to check the third-party libraries and codes for you.
Do you have examples of those tools that you're talking about that we can integrate into the CI/CD pipeline?
So for checking the libraries, the third-party libraries, there is Sneak or some other tools. I don't have the name at top of my mind, but Sneak is a very good tool for checking the third-party libraries. And it has different plugins for your IDE, I guess. Eclipse or IntelliJ IDE, and also there is a Jenkins plugin as well.
Cool.
So
I think we have. Oh, sorry, Faith.
No.
Or Jax. Sorry. Who wants to? You want to do the questions in the chat, Jax?
Oh no, I had a
yeah.
question.
Oh yeah. Go ahead.
So, given all your experience in everything that you've looked into in compromising compilers, how is the layperson, the normal end user of these applications or video games or whatever, how are they supposed to, or what can they do to feel more secure with what they're installing?
Even the end users of development environments.
Yeah, because I know, like, I think we all know that, like, if you're working in the gaming industry, you know, it's very fast paced. You know, people need results when they need results. So, you know, giving them 40 extra steps to go through, you know, the likelihood that the gaming industry is going to do that, you know.
Yeah, true. I guess at least having your development like environment scanned by a security solution like once in a while. Lots of these malware components could be found and like detected by security softwares if they were being like exposed to security softwares. But I guess even like these days, many people don't don't scan their systems that much, and like security software sometimes whitelist some parts of the system. But if you specifically want them to scan that part of the system, that directory or that program's like assets, that would help. And also keep your environment as simple as possible. Just make sure that all the tools and everything you have in your environment are the ones you actually need and use. Yeah. And update it all the time.
Yeah. Okay, so there's two more questions in the chat that I'm going to try to push together into, because it's sort of it could be one question, but here's the first part of it. Are most compiler compromises that do they involve malicious libraries, or are the attackers compromising the developer's machine to infect the supply chain?
Okay. I actually didn't get the first part.
Yeah, so it's basically asking, are compiler compromises, do they involve malicious libraries that I guess exist outside of the developer and the developer brings them in? Or are they compromising the developer's machines to actually infect the supply chain locally on the developer's environment? I think
I
that's
guess,
how.
yeah, I guess with the examples that we have investigated, the case was more like the attackers actually targeted specific systems of developers and implanted their malicious code and like trojanized compiler modules specifically in that system. So the system that like the environment, the development environment was compromised, like, and all the required like malware modules were implanted on that specific system.
Yeah. Okay, cool. And then the last part of this question is, are these mostly insider threats or APT groups?
With the ones that like the last few examples that we explained, starting from ShadowPad and the CCleaner, which was also the same from the same threat actor, and the gaming industry, and also they were all APT actors. APT actors going like targeted attacks, going after like big software vendors, gaming vendors, to try to get into a massive number of users, or in some cases, like they were after very specific users that they, I guess they knew they use that kind of software on their systems. Like for example, with the ASUS case, that I didn't explain that much because it was a bit irrelevant to our specific topic today. The attackers had compromised ASUS update process, like update. They had programmed the updater tool for ASUS computers, but they were actually looking for very specific targets. So every system that they would end up, they would look for like a specific MAC addresses. If the system didn't have that MAC address, they wouldn't infect it. They were only interested in a few, and it was not easy to recognize all of the actual targets, but we have managed to find out some of the targets and who they were actually after.
And in the examples that we looked at today, are those all Chinese affiliated, or do we also have examples that are from different regions?
No, I guess with the case of Induc, was it a Chinese? No, I don't think so. No. And of course, the concerns started. We talked about the concerns that started in U.S. Air Force in 1970s and the 1980s with the Ken Thompson lecture. I guess it's not just a matter of like using Chinese softwares or being a developer in China. It's a global issue.
Cool. This was a real great topic to discuss here on this show. I really learned a lot, and I think based on the comments in the chat, our audience did too. There are a lot of people there are people saying that it was excellent talk, loved it, thanks so much. So Thank you both for sharing this kind of scary attack surface here.
Thank you guys for
No worries, it was a
giving,
pleasure.
giving us this opportunity.
Cool. Yeah. So I guess Faith, do you want to just wrap this up here? Got some.
Yes, so yes, we do have an announcement. On December the 6th, we are hosting our very first CTF. It's during this competition, you will learn how to use Docker and containerization, and this will be a great opportunity for you to get started with Docker. And even though you already know Docker or you're an experienced Docker user, you still have something to learn because we will also have more advanced topics in the challenges. Some of the topics that will be covered are how to build Docker images using Docker files, how to use tags, pull and push images to Docker Hub, the use of multi-stage builds to create smaller images. You'll also run containers in different Docker networks. You'll be able to manipulate IP filter rules to bypass the isolation of Docker bridge networks. And many more. The challenge creator is Renan Diaz. So we look forward to having you guys during our first CTF.
Cool. All right. I guess we're good here. We're good to wrap. So thank you all very much for joining us. Thank you guys for teaching us about this amazing topic, and we will post all the links to everyone's Twitters and slides in the chat in the YouTube video when it's posted. So there you go.